Good morning. April 7th, 2024. We're in the book of Leviticus. Started back in Genesis a couple years ago. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Numbers is next. There's more action in the book of Numbers. Leviticus covers the first year, basically, after they came out of Egypt, after the children of Israel had come out of Egypt, and God is retraining them. Again, the image we have is from the Cecil B. DeMille movie that they all were very humble, which is fine. I mean, but it's not true. But go down those. I remember just the slaves were singing and they were waiting for the Messiah. And Yvonne DiCarlo was very, yes, he's coming. And they're all, that this was a nation of people who were worshiping the Messiah. I mean, worshiping the God of Israel, just waiting to be delivered from Egypt. And really, they didn't want to be delivered from Egypt. They wanted the Egyptians to stop oppressing them, but they loved where they were in Goshen. That's why they hadn't left in the first place. That's why 4 or 5 weeks after they got out, they tried to come back. Let's build and go to calf and go back to Egypt because we had leeks and onion. They just didn't want to be oppressed. Um, Interestingly enough, there were a percentage of slaves here in America after the Civil War. There's a percentage of them, obviously not a huge percentage, but there was a percentage of slaves who, once they were freed, stayed at the plantation. I'll work because that's what they had known for 150 years, 200 years. And so, you get used to a certain place, even though it's not uh, ideal, it becomes, you're just used to it. So they were used to Egypt. They just stop oppressing us. We had it good when Joseph was second in charge, and if you just stop oppressing us, we're good. So they were people who didn't really want to leave Egypt and were worshiping Egyptian gods. They weren't worshiping the God of Israel. He was a mystery. He was a rumor, but none of them had any personal relationships with him. So he's got to reteach them. And so Leviticus covers that first period right after God instructed them to build a temple. I'm sorry, a tabernacle. So he'd given them he met with them on the mountain. Hey, I'm God. And they said, oh, you're too big and scary. And so they said, yeah, back off, God. I don't take all that. So he says, okay, I'll speak to Moses, but I'm giving you the opportunity for all of you, each of you, to individually have a relationship with me. And they said, nah, I don't want it. No, thank you. Because they weren't used to a real God that spoke, and the gods of Egypt obviously weren't real. So you can walk by an idol and it didn't suddenly go, hey, and come at you. But God was there. He was real. They had never had an experience with a real God ever, since Isaac, 200 years earlier. So, so he says, okay, let me train these priests. And wasn't shocked by it. Again, God didn't go, uh-oh, plan B. God doesn't have a plan B. He knows what they're going to do. But he always gives us the opportunity to do the right thing so that when we stand before him on judgment day, we won't be able to say, well, you never gave, I would have done that had you just offered. So he offers, knowing that they're not going to do it. So his plan B, which wasn't plan B, it was plan A all along, is to present them with a high priest then. I'll choose a priestly line, and they'll be the emissary between us and you, between God and man. Us up in heaven, thinking, but between God and man, he'll be the emissary in between, and the interpreter, and it'll be a type of what Jesus is going to do. The Messiah will do 1,200 years from now on the cross. He'll be that emissary between God and man. Within days of them rebelling and saying, let's build an idol and forget this God who brought us out, we're going to go back. God takes Moses back up on the mountain, gives us some instructions. Here's how you worship me. Here's how you worship me. Let me correct all the ways that you worshiped me back in Egypt. And it's specifically addressing, you'll see today, a couple things where clearly God's not bringing up these bizarre, like, why are you bringing that up? Who would ever think to do that? Well, that's what the priests were doing back in Egypt. That's what the priests were doing in the land of Canaan, where God was taking them. And so let me be real specific to you so you'll know how not to act. So you're not imitating those nations because I'm actually a real God. And this is how you have to, if you're coming at me, you got to come at me correct, they say in the vernacular. So Leviticus is him retraining them. Then the book of Numbers covers those years after that, because once he says to them in Leviticus, so here's how you worship me once I bring you into the land, and he knows they're going to mess up. He takes them in the book of Numbers to the precipice of going into the new land, and they go, I don't want to do it. So he said, okay, let me get rid of this generation that is just so used to doing things their way. And there's always a generation that is so used to doing things their way that generation must pass away so that the next generation that hasn't been entrenched with those particular ways of thinking can go to the next level. So 40 years they're in the wilderness, and then the book of Numbers covers that 40 years. Book of Deuteronomy covers their final instructions before they go into Canaan. So Leviticus is their first initial instructions in that first year of the 40. Deuteronomy is their final instructions in the 40th year of that 40-year period. And Numbers is all the stuff, the crazy stuff that happened during that 40 years. Because if we don't know, it's like, oh, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, they're just books, but they tell a story. They tell a story. And the Bible is one story. Here, book of Genesis, here's why you need a Messiah. Here's where it all messed up. Here's why you need a Redeemer. You were in the Garden of Eden with me, things got messed up. Uh, I I sent you as proof of how messed up you can be. I sent you to Egypt simply to get fed. There was a drought, and I wanted all the nations to know and wonder how come in Egypt there's food. There's a drought all over the Middle East, all over the known world. How come in Egypt? So that word could spread, which it did, about this God of the Israelites. So it was a missionary campaign. It was an evangelistic campaign. They were only supposed to be there for 5 years and then go back to the Canaan. And word did spread again when the Israelites got to Jericho. Oh, we've heard about your God. We've heard about all these nations had heard. So that they were of no excuse. Once God spoke to these people, the children of Israel, he used them to evangelize. People watched. Once you claim that you have a connection to God, people are now watching you. Okay, let's see what you do then, since you claim to be whatever you claim to be. So the nations were watching these people that God had chosen. But they stayed, they chose to stay in Exodus instead of follow the plan that God had for them to live. And so he had to allow things to get horribly wrong for them so they would finally want to leave Egypt. He takes credit for all the suffering that they went through in Egypt. So they'd want to leave and to do God's plan. Here's the good thing. When God makes up a plan for us, he's not hoping that it works out. He already sees it's going to work out. But there are certain things that we have to go through sometimes, in order for us. Now, we could just choose to go along with the plan. When I was little, I thought that pain and suffering was just part of it no matter what. Even if you're doing the right thing, you're just going to say, you can go along with the plan, and God's plan goes very smoothly. Now, people are going to persecute you for righteousness' sake, and there are other things that you're going to go through, but you won't suffer the same sort of calamity that you might suffer if you're doing the opposite of God's plan, right? So he makes us all have a prodigal son experience where, okay, fine, don't do it. And we end up eating with the pigs, and we go, oh, I'm eating with the pigs. That eating with the pigs things would not have happened. Now, other things would have happened, but that eating with the pigs things would not have happened had he just stayed at his father's house. So when we were in line with God's plan, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't have to go through. But God's going to get us. That's the good news, actually, where we go, let me reevaluate what I'm doing. This is not working. Let me reevaluate That's what he waits for us to do. Some of us are stubborn and we never reevaluate, but let me reevaluate. This is just not no. Maybe I should be doing it. Let me try it this way, or maybe I should be doing that. And then we end up where God knew we were going to be all along. So they end up in the wilderness. Exodus is extracting them so they can get back to the plan that he had enunciated to Abraham. And Leviticus is simply laying out. So here's how you worship me. Here's how you have a, because I've got to do three things, which will I've emphasized. He has to teach them how to worship him because they're used to worshiping Egyptian God, so that he doesn't destroy them. I will destroy you if you keep doing these things that in the way that you're doing them. I will destroy you. So don't do that. Um, uh, Secondly, I'm going to teach you how to love your neighbor so you guys don't destroy each other. Don't steal from your neighbor. Don't kill your neighbor. Don't sodomize your neighbor. Don't do it. These are terrible things that other people do in other nations to each other, and why those nations won't exist after a while because they're going to destroy each other. But the third thing is that here are some things to keep you personally alive. So one, so I don't destroy you because you're worshiping other gods, so you don't destroy each other, so that you don't destroy yourself through bad eating habits and certain things that you're going to do that are going to destroy your own health. I've got to preserve you alive. So just even if you don't understand why you can't just eat an animal that just dropped dead in front of you, you don't know why he's dropped dead. You don't know what disease he might have had. An animal that's alive and vibrant that you kill for food, not kill for sport, but an animal that's vibrant and alive that you kill for that reason, yes, it's healthy probably to eat. But an animal that just suddenly falls and drops dead, don't eat that animal because you don't know why. You don't have the equipment. Why? Just trust me. Now, later, 1,200 years from now, I'm going to change this dietary law because you'll have better ways of preserving food and better way. But at the so I'm going to give you laws that keep you personally alive. So there's three sets of laws God is giving in Leviticus. Here's how you worship me so I don't destroy you. Here's how you live with each other and love one another so that you don't destroy each other. And here's how you personally just stay alive so you don't destroy yourself. Okay, so we're in Leviticus chapter 22. Um, Wait, there we go. Leviticus chapter 22, verse 1 and 2. And God's going to be repeating some things he brought up earlier. That's why we can zip through the whole chapter, and not like when we were in chapter 18. We took 5 weeks. Chapter 22, we go right straight through. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Aaron and his sons. Now, Aaron is the priestly line that he chose, that they separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel. That they separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel. Why shouldn't they touch the holy things? Okay, so the holy things are the sacrifices that the children of Israel are bringing to the tabernacle. God's teaching that there must be a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice for their sin. So that when the Messiah comes and he dies for their sins, they'll go, oh, this is what we've been learning for 1,200 years. He didn't want anybody to miss it. So the holy things, he says, but separate yourself from them. Don't immediately just jump on them as soon as they bring them in. There's some rules that are attached to the sacrifices. So separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel when they bring their sacrifices to the tabernacle, that they do not profane my holy name by what they dedicate to me. I am the Lord. So that they don't profane me by what those people are dedicating to me, with what they're giving to me, what they're sacrificing to me. Now, the priest had a right to the offerings that the people brought. There are 5 types of offerings that we talked about at the beginning of Leviticus. Why would you remember that? But there were sin offerings and burnt offerings and peace offerings and heave offerings and wave offerings, and they all had different value, different things that they meant. And for 4 of those 5 offerings, the priest had a right to eat them because there was a barbecue. I'm bringing this lamb. I'm bringing this food. Some of it was meant for God. Well, God couldn't eat any of it. I mean, but some of it was like, we're sharing this with you, God. We'll get that. In Numbers chapter 18, God's explaining this. He's reminding them. Numbers chapter 18, verse 11. It says, this also is yours, talking to the Levites, the priests, the heave offering of their gift. So they would take their grain and cakes and things that they had made from what they had grown, and they would offer it up to the Lord. Kind of, you've seen in some churches where they take up the offering and then they'll stand and they'll hold it up to God, as though God's taking it from them, right? He's not. But it's them psychologically saying, we're giving this to you. So they would heave their stuff up to the Lord. Now, he wouldn't catch it, but that was just symbolic of, we're giving this to you. Well, he says, well, now that they've given it to God, the priests would then take it and they were allowed to eat it. He says, I have given them to you and your sons and daughters with you as an ordinance forever. You always get to have of the heave offering. Everyone who is clean, all of you priests who are clean in your house, you may eat it. All the best of the oil, this is Numbers 18:12. All the best of the new wine, the grain, the first fruits. See the olive oil, the grapes, because that's what they had there. A lot of olives, a lot of grapes. The grain, the wheat, all the first fruits with the offering to the Lord. I've given them to you, you priests. So after they heave it up to me, you can have it. Whatever, this is verse 13. Whatever first ripe fruit is in their land, which they bring to the Lord, shall be yours. And everyone who is clean in your house may eat it. And in Leviticus, we're going to get back to it. He's going to define what's clean and what's not clean and why. Verse 20 of Numbers 18. Then the Lord said to Aaron, you shall have no inheritance in the land. When I take you to the land, because the book of Numbers is getting them ready to go to the land. Once you finally go to the land, you don't get to grow any olives and grapes and wheat, and you'll have no inheritance. There'll be no place that is yours. They're all going to be farmers. They'll be growing all this food. They're going to bring a tenth of it to me. They're going to bring the other 90% they're going to keep for themselves. You don't get that. You don't get 90% to keep for yourself. So all that you eat of will be of what they bring to the temple. You shall have no inheritance in the land, nor shall you have any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel. So I'm designing a people who will have to trust me, this one family group, for everything. You'll just have to trust that I'm going to feed you, because I want you 24 hours a day focusing on me and how to pray for the people and follow these instructions. So you can't spend your whole day working in the fields and like everybody else is going to be spending your time. I need people who are set apart, because it's that important for you to be trained how to worship me, and that you lead the people in that. So you don't get your own portion. You don't get your own inheritance. I'm your portion. I'm your inheritance. I will supply your needs. Verse 24, for the tithes of the children of Israel, this is Numbers 18. The tithes of the children of Israel, which they offer up as a heap offering to the Lord, I have given to the Levites as an inheritance. Therefore I have said to them, among the children of Israel, they shall have no, that's why I said they shall have no inheritance, because you have to live off the tithes and the offerings that are brought in, and just trust that the people do the right thing. So back to Leviticus 22, verse 3. So say to them, whoever of all your descendants, you Levites, throughout your generations, who goes near the holy things, which I've told you are yours, which the children of Israel dedicate to the Lord, while he has uncleanness upon him, that person shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord. So he said earlier, in the book of Numbers, what I read earlier, is that back off, don't just jump on them, give some space, let people bring it in, make sure you're clean. If you're clean, you can go. But if you have uncleanness, and he's going to define what the uncleanness is, don't touch them, because I'm trying to train you. God's doing two things simultaneously. I'm training you how to present things to me, and I'm also training you what uncleanness is, because you can't see, you don't have microscopes, you have no idea what's clean and what's not clean. So I'm just going to give you a list, so that you can wash yourself. Partly if it's an attitude, and there's partly a biological reason for God's doing. So there's a spiritual metaphor, there's a psychological aspect he's trying to teach them, and there's a physical reason for what God's about to explain to them. There's three different types of reasons. But if you don't do what I'm saying, I will cut you off from my presence. Um, some people interpret that as you'll no longer be able to go into the Holy of Holies where my presence is. And other scholars interpret that as what happened to Nadab and Abihu. I will cut you off from my presence, from being on this earth in that way. We know this is different because the other punishments for being unclean or not doing what God said was, it says, I'll cut you off from my people. So you have to live outside the camp. But he says, I cut you off from my presence. That's much more severe. The God's always more severe on the Levites, on the priest, always. Leviticus chapter 7, verse 20 says, but the person who eats the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offering that belongs to the Lord while he is unclean, that person. So the people themselves also got to partake of the peace offering, which is different than the heave offering. But just know that the peace offering was them, quote unquote, eating a meal with God. Here, God, let's sit down, and this is the meal that there's peace between us. Just like I would invite somebody to my home and feed them when we eat together. I'm inviting you into my heart, Lord, and we're eating together. We're going to fellowship together. So this is my peace offering with you. So you got to eat it personally. You didn't give it to the priest. The priest didn't eat it. You got to eat it. So to a normal person, though, if you're unclean when you do it, if you show up in the tabernacle and you're unclean and you haven't taken the time to clean yourself, and do they mean dirt? No, but we'll explain. It says that person should be cut off from this people. So you got to go outside the camp and clean. There's a time period where you got to live, but he didn't say you'll be cut off from my presence. That's scarier. Verse 21 of Leviticus 7. Moreover, the person who touches any unclean thing, such as human uncleanness, an unclean animal, or any abominable unclean thing, and who eats the flesh of the sacrifice, the peace offering. So you know you've touched a dead person. We'll go through the list. And yet you still don't wash. You have no respect for your own personal health. Psychologically, you're saying, it doesn't matter. God doesn't care. Or spiritually, you're not understanding what spiritual principle I'm trying to supply. It says that person would cut off from his people. But to the Levites, he says, you're going to be cut off from my presence if you're unclean. Okay, so what's unclean? He gives us a short list here. Leviticus chapter 22, verse 4. Whatever man of the descendants of Aaron who is a leper. So if one of the priests becomes a leper, that's unclean. There's a spiritual, psychological, and physical reason why you don't want to be eating communal food. You have leprosy. Don't sit down with everyone at the table and then have your ear fall into the salad. Nobody noticed it, and somebody eats your ear. Don't do that. Wait until you're healed, then you can do it. So there was a physical reason, health reason for doing it, but there's also psychological, a kind of a disrespect for God. Like, God doesn't matter. Which is different than when God says, come as you are. He's not talking about him accepting you. Anyone could approach. However, when you're making a sacrifice, you're saying, Lord, I'm making a sacrifice. He talks about how that sacrifice needs to be. God doesn't okay, I'll get to it. Anyway, so if a man has leprosy, Leviticus chapter 13, verse 3, God's already gone over this. So Leviticus 22, he's repeating himself in 22, reminding himself, like in Leviticus 13:3. The priest shall examine the sore on the skin of the body, and if the hair on the sore is turned white, and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous sore. And the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. So he said, here's how you know somebody is unclean, and here's how you know if they're in the healing side of it, and they're no longer leprous, So if you have leprosy, verse 4 also says, or has a discharge. This is gonorrhea, just to be clear. Leviticus 15:2, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. Just in case you don't know, because you wouldn't know, they wouldn't know. Like, there's another bodily fluid coming out of me. Big deal. There's different fluids come out of me. And God says, nope. If something just is coming out of you and you're not going to the bathroom, but it comes out of you, it's just, You're unclean. You don't know that, but you can't just ignore that. Something's going on, and I want you to sit down at meal with everybody because they're all sharing these communal meals, right? Because something's going on with you, and you need to separate yourself until you're clean. And that's as far as affecting the health of everyone. Leviticus chapter 22, verse 4. You shall not eat of the holy offering until he is clean, and whoever touches anything made unclean by a corpse, so a dead body. Again, these are all physiological things because you don't know why the person died, and God wasn't going to spend a lot of time explaining. Just know if someone just dropped dead, if an animal drops dead, don't eat it because you don't know why. So just don't eat it as general rule. And then there could be plenty of times when it's okay, but you won't know the difference. And I got to keep you alive. So again, three things God's trying to do: teach you how to worship me, so I don't destroy you because you're worshiping other gods. Teach you how to live with and love one another, so you don't destroy each other. Third is teach you how to eat and live so that you don't destroy yourself. Uh, or a man who had an emission of semen. That's another part of verse 4. Again, we're looking at all the other examples of this is talking about disease. Someone has leprosy, talking about disease. Someone has an emission, talking about disease. Someone dropped dead. This emission of semen is someone has a problem. It's involuntary. It's some sort of continual, like the woman with the issue of blood for 17 years. She had a medical condition that wasn't just her normal monthly visitor. It was for 17 years. So that's God had two different separately rules. If this goes on for months and years, that's a problem. And this is how you recognize it because they wouldn't know. I mean, I guess stuff that's obvious to us, how would they know? They wouldn't know. So he says, if you have this involuntary emission of semen and it's continuous and it's happening, there's a disease going on. People like to use this for other things, and it's not. Leprosy, gonorrhea, cancer, a dead body. Obviously, it's in that same category of God saying these are diseases that you won't recognize. And in fact, in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 4, he says, every bed is unclean on which he who has this discharge lies. Everything on which he sits shall be unclean. Because they wouldn't know, oh, this body fluidly just came out of me. Big deal. Like, no, it's all unclean. If he who has the discharge spits on him who is unclean, then he shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until even, like, stay away from anybody, whomever the one who has discharge touches and has not rinsed his hands in water. We learned, everybody, just wash your hands. That will keep you alive. He shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until even. So he's giving them sanitary laws that they would not know. They would not know. But again, the Jewish nation has been healthier than throughout history than other people, probably until the last 40 years. Maybe we've caught up with the Jews. And people thought they were witches and other things for that reason. How come we all got a plague and that group of people didn't get a plague? So during the bubonic plague and all this stuff, there'd be Jewish communities where God preserved them, and so they got accused of, well, they must have started the plague, or instead of going to them and what is your secret, so that we may imitate, which we finally started doing. Why don't you have cervical cancer? Well, we circumcise, we do all these other things. Oh, okay. So God's preserving this people because he's got to keep them alive. If they all die out, then he can't bring the Messiah through them. So just trust me, do these things even though you don't understand them. And so he's giving them these lists. These are physical health things, but they also have a psychological component of when you approach God and a spiritual lesson that he's trying to teach them. Leviticus chapter 22, verse 5. Whoever touches any creeping thing by which he would be made unclean. So he says, I gave you a list of the types of creeping things that could, possibly make you sick. He's using the word unclean. Or any person by whom he would become unclean, whatever his uncleanness be. So if you touch the leper, there's got to be a period of separation, isolation, the verse 6, the person who has touched any such thing shall be unclean until evening and shall not eat the holy offerings unless he washes his body with water. And when the sun goes down, he shall be clean. and afterwards you may eat the holy things. So he didn't call you a sinner. He's saying you're unclean. You're not a sinner. You haven't done anything wrong. Well, that because this God, he's unfair. What if somebody is homeless and they're unclean and they're dirty? They're not sinners. And again, that's why we put showers at our church and stuff like. And like you want to invite that person in and help them clean for their own health's sake, right? And get them medical attention and all that stuff. That God's saying this is not about being a sinner. This is about your health and preserving you alive, right? So that's why we help people and get them into certain situations because they may be making themselves sick and not know. Um, Afterward, he may eat the holy offerings because it is his food. So once you're clean, you can eat the holy offering. You can share that meal with everybody else. It's your food. Not trying to stop you from eating your food. Just trying to give you this inoculation period, period where you're separate to make sure that you're not going to spread some disease. Verse 8, whatever dies naturally or is torn by beasts, he shall not eat. What he means by die naturally, again, this perfectly alive animal is running around and suddenly drops dead, and you see it just drop dead right in front of you. Don't eat that because you don't know why it dropped dead. Or it's torn by beast. You don't know what disease the other beast might have had that suddenly was eating and devouring that. So if you run up on something that's been ripped to shreds by some other beast, since you don't know if that other beast was rabid or not, don't. If you are chasing after a deer or sheep or something like that and you kill it for food, you saw that it was healthy, you know that you did not have a disease when you killed it, you can take that. But if you just find something that's been ripped to shreds, don't eat that. And you don't know how long it's been sitting out. Has it been a day? Has it been 5 days? Don't eat that. So these are just laws. Let me just keep you alive. Verse 9, they shall therefore keep my ordinances, lest they bear sin for it and die thereby. So the sin comes when you ignore what I ask you to do. That's the sin. The sin is not being unclean. The sin is, who cares what God says? That's when you've sinned. And die thereby. You've ignored it, and now you're dead. Oh, how'd that work out for you?
That was a thing.
Yes. Oh, okay. If they profane it, I, the Lord, sanctify them. So I don't die if you profane. I will sanctify you if you follow my ordinances. If you ignore it, you're profaning what I'm asking you to do. Leviticus chapter 22, verse 10. No outsider shall eat the holy offering. Now he's telling, again, this is book of Leviticus is written to the priests. That's why we don't take all of it and say, oh my God, it says in the book of Leviticus that this was instructions to the priest for that particular time period. No outsider shall eat the holy offering. One who dwells with the priest or a hired servant shall not eat the holy offering, the holy thing. So I've designated you priests that when they bring the offering, you get to eat it, but you can't, but only the Levites can do it. So somebody who's visiting with you, hey, how are you? I'm just visiting from Babylon. No, you're not a priest. You don't get to eat of the holy thing. You can eat your own thing, but you can't eat of the offering that people bring. Or a hired servant. A hired servant is not a priest. Shall not. But if the priest buys a person with his money, now what's the difference between a hired servant and somebody you've bought? So a hired servant is a fellow Israelite who somehow got into financial trouble and is now paying off their debt by working for you. They are not suddenly a Levite. They're not suddenly a member of your family. They are from the house of Issachar or Dan or Nebulon or whoever. Zebulon. I'm just making up names now. So they're not part of your family. They're just working to pay off their debt, and they're going to be gone. However, if some outsiders come and you actually have purchased them and now they are, and you've adopted them into your family. So if you said I will pay off that person's debt, I will pay off their debt, and now they will be part of my family. Then that person may eat because you've adopted them. They would do that. It really was literally adoption in those days. And back in Jesus's time, um, uh, the Romans would adopt, or wealthy citizens would adopt poor people, and they would, here's a whole bunch of money. I'm adopting this person into my family, so I'm paying off their debt. I am, and now and they're going to get all of the rights and privileges that go with being in my family. It was not the same as slavery became uh, later, where you're going to live out in the field. The 20 of you are going to live in that little shack, and I'm going to beat you every day. And they literally were becoming part of the family. That's what Jesus is saying. That's what God's saying here. If you buy a person with your money, then you may eat because you've made them part of your family. You're going to give them your privilege. You're going to dress them in the finest clothing. That's what God does it to us. Jesus paid the price for us. He paid the debt that we could not pay. And that's the picture that God is painting. Jesus paid this huge debt, right, that we could never pay. And now we are part of the family and we get all the rights and privileges bestowed on us. So it's a different, Jesus didn't pay the price and now we're God's slaves and he beats us every morning. So this is not describing slavery. This is saying, I paid off your debt. This person's part of my family. He says, that person may eat. But the person who's just working for you for the next 3 or 4 years to pay off their debt and they're going to go back to their family, they can't eat. They're not officially part of your family. Um, so heathen people from other cultures, again, who came into the Jewish community, they had to be circumcised. They were allowed to partake of the lamb. They had every privilege of Israelites. You know, this person from this other country, they now are part of the Jewish community. Uh, Leviticus 22, verse 11, second part of it. One who is born in your house may eat of your food. Obviously, your son and your daughter. Verse 12. If the priest's daughter, though, is married to an outsider, she may not eat of the holy things. Hey, daddy, I just married this Babylonian. Well, you are now Babylonian. So have fun. Goodbye. So, verse 13. But if the priest's daughter is a widow or divorced and has no child and has returned to her father's house as she was in her youth. Okay, I'm back. Then she may eat of her father's food, but no outsider shall eat it. So once, if she has decided, and literally to marry an outsider, someone outside of the Jewish faith at that time, the Jewish people at that time, not somebody from another tribe, but literally a Canaanite, an Ammonite, and you've become one of them, no. But if you're living back with your family, obviously you're still part of the family, you may eat. Uh, 14. If a man eats the holy offering unintentionally, let's say that somebody else accidentally, oops, I didn't mean to eat that lamb I just brought in, okay, then he shall restore a holy offering to the priests and add 1/5 to it, like, because there has to be a slight tax on it. So you eat accidentally what the priest was supposed to eat, just restore it to the priest. Restore your offering, and but add a little tiny bit to it so that you don't get in the habit of just doing it. Like, oh, I accidentally ate all that food. Oh, what, there's a slight penalty so that you don't get in the habit of accidentally doing it over and over. Um, Verse 15, they shall not profane the holy offering of the children of Israel, which they offer to the Lord. You haven't profaned it. You're okay. Or allow them to bear the guilt of the trespass when they eat their holy offerings, for I, the Lord, will sanctify them. Like, I understand it was a mistake, so you're not guilty. Oh, you're a sinner. Because, and let's say, on a practical basis, there's some money you've set aside to put in church, but something came up and you spent that money and you, oh man, I forgot that I was saving that to put in the church. So just restore that money. Okay, next month I'll give this, or next week, or now I'll set. He says, you're not guilty. You don't have to bear the guilt of trade. You spent, that is sinful money. That money belonged to God and you spent it on a television and now you're gonna go to hell. God's like, no, no, no. Just restore it. It's not that kind of people are making you feel guilty. God's like, I'm not making you feel guilty for that. I'll sanctify. Just restore it, and the offering you were intending to give. Now give it now. It's no big deal, and that's happened. Okay, offerings accepted and not accepted. So now we're talking about the offering and not the person being unclean, but the offering themselves. Verse 17. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, verse 18, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, whatever man of the house of Israel or the strangers in Israel who offers his sacrifice for any of his vows or for any of his free will offerings. So you say, Lord, I'm vowing to do this, I'm vowing to do that, and here's my offering in proof that I am going to do this thing. So there's some vow you've made to the Lord. Or your free will offering. This is not part of your tithes where I ask for 10%, period. This is just, I'm just going to give extra because I want to. So the people in my church who are tithing, and then they give to the food ministry extra, or they get to that ministry. That, I'm sure the same thing happens at your churches, right? So if it's just your free will offering, which starts to the Lord as a burnt offering, verse 19, you shall offer of your own free will a male without blemish, though, from the cattle. Just because it's your free will offering doesn't mean it could be just any old nasty thing. From the sheep or from the goat. Excuse me. Whatever has a defect, you shall not offer, for it shall not be acceptable on your behalf. You're saying, Lord, here's my service to you. I'm offering myself. I'm offering this gift. Don't just give God any old thing, because that's now it's talking about your attitude. So there are three things I was addressing. Physically, this is going to affect you physically. God's concerned about your psychological attitude toward him, because God reads our hearts. And then there's a spiritual component that God's trying to show us. Right now, he's addressing, you can't just find any old nasty thing and just say, I'm giving this to God. This really good thing I'm saving for myself, but this thing that's broken and all messed up, I'll give that to God. You wouldn't, well, you shouldn't. I was gonna say, you wouldn't do that to a friend of yours, maybe you might. But there's an added, here, Mom, this thing that I broke, it's for you, that I stepped on and accidentally spit. This is for you, but this really nice one, I kept. Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
So you wouldn't do that, so hopefully, right? So God says, don't do that to me. Don't. If you looked at all your sheep, 10 of them are perfect one. That one is green for some reason. You don't even know why. Well, let me give that one to God. That's a bad attitude. If that's why you're doing it. First, Leviticus 22:22 says, those that are blind or broken or maimed or have an ulcer or eczema or scabs, don't offer to the Lord. When you go through and you're looking at your different sheep, because that's your attitude. You shall not offer that to the Lord, nor make an offering of fire by them on the altar of the Lord. What are you giving me? And what are you saying to me by giving this to me? Well, God won't notice that this thing has 5 legs. Don't do that. Okay, verse 24. You shall not offer to the Lord what is bruised or crushed or torn or cut. You shall not make any offering of them in your land. So don't he's just saying, because of your attitude. If that's all you have, fine. But if you really looked at all your sheep and found the one that was looking crazy, well, I'm gonna give this to the Lord. Like, why? What are you saying to me? Okay. Nor from a foreigner's hand shall you offer any of these as the bread of your God, because you don't know where the foreigner has been. Give me of your service. Don't take from somebody else and I'll give this to God. This thing that this person brought to me, I don't even know what it is, but God will eat it. God is not Mikey. You give it to Mikey, he'll eat anything. No. We never heard from Mikey later because, no, I'm just making up something. He's dead. Who knows what happened to Mikey? Anyway, nor from a foreigner's hand shall you offer any of these as the bread of your God, because their corruption is in them and defects are in them. They shall not be accepted on your behalf. Verse 28, whether it is a cow or a ewe, do not kill. Now, he's addressing specific practices of other nations where they had these strange mythologies. They came up with them because they could not explain why there was suddenly an eclipse. Total eclipse on Monday. Because we have science, science is not the enemy of God. We know why things are happening, but they didn't know why things were happening. Why did the sun disappear for 4 minutes? Why was there a volcano? Why was there an earthquake? So they would just make up crazy stories, and the gods must be upset, or the gods must have gas, and so they would come up with these strange solutions to these problems. So whether it's a cow or a ewe, do not kill both her and her young on the same day. They had come up with if you kill the mother and the calf on the same day, then you will have prosperity, and they would just make up stuff like in Exodus chapter 23, verse 19. The first of the first fruits of the land you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. But that's something that other countries believed. So the Bible sounds like God is just arbitrary. And don't wear polka dots and stand on your nose. It's like, why would you bring that up? Because other countries were doing it. And again, that's what God is like. Don't do those crazy things that they do, like take a baby goat and but they believe that would make the land fertile and stuff like that. Um, so I read some commentaries where they thought because God was compassionate and He didn't want them to do cruel things. Well, yes, they were killing animals, so it, He's not talking about be kind to animals. Not that we should be kind to animals, but that he's talking about these things because that's what other nations were doing. I wish commentators would study better. Anyway, because and so it's like don't do that crazy things that they do. Don't do that. Uh, Leviticus 22 verse 29. And when you offer sacrifice at Thanksgiving to the Lord, offer it of your own free will. On the same day it shall be eaten. You shall leave none of it until morning. I am the Lord. So once you've killed it, you don't have a refrigerator. You don't have Ziploc bags to put stuff in. You're just going to leave it out all night. Don't eat it the next day. And then it goes on to say later, and certainly don't eat it 2 days later. You just left it sitting there all night. But they don't know. They don't know. And again, other nations are being wiped out. People are getting sick and ill. And they just thought, well, their gods are punishing them. No, they have these dietary habits that they don't know is killing them. So they don't know that you can't just leave something out. Uh, in our cultures, women instinctively often know these things. For some reason, men don't. And so men will just leave something. I left this pizza in my car from 4 days ago. I wonder if I should still eat it. And all that guy's buddies will say, yeah, sure, but sitting in your car. I mean, like, why? What could be wrong with it? And we just have no idea. So God has to tell you things like this because something wrong with the males. God put something automatically in most females because they really have to stay alive because they bear the children and go for it. So these women have to stay alive. So I'm gonna give them common sense. But you men, I got to spell it out for you. It's been 6 days. Don't eat that. Leviticus chapter 22, verse 31. Therefore you shall keep my commandments and perform them. I am the Lord. You shall not profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. Last verse. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. So I will sanctify you if you do these things. I'm not punishing you. I'm actually just trying to keep you alive. I'm the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord. And he has to keep saying this because they really, really believed that he was just one of the lords. And he keeps saying, no, I am the Lord. Those other gods, they don't exist. But for 200 years, they've been taught that they did. So he has to keep saying, remember me? I brought you out of the land of Egypt. I parted the Red Sea. I did all that stuff. That's me. Please believe me. Nah, not going to do it. I don't, they would go off and do their own thing. When we get to Numbers, we go, wow. Why wouldn't they believe God? But why don't we believe God? God says, don't do that. And we think, what's the harm in it? No, okay. So anyway, so I'm done with Leviticus chapter 22. Thank you so much for watching. On Wednesdays, I'm in the book of Luke. Which is very interesting to me. I guess the whole Bible is interesting, so I'm going to say that about every book. So maybe some of you will join me there, and we'll continue with the book of Leviticus next week. How do I get back to? There we go. So again, thank you so much. All right, bye bye.